So you get to Oddworld, and this was around the time that they kind of had a major changeover of people, right? Like they've been working down one path with the game, and best I understand, there was kind of a changing of quite a few of the people on the team. They brought in a whole bunch of new people. Were you kind of there as that was happening, or like were you the beginning of the new people? How did that work out?
As I understand it, I was the first wave of the next sacrificial group.
Oh, wait, the next sacrificial group?
Well, it seemed to be the way. So, like Oddworld would go through designers a lot, right? So, um, they would finish a title, and then they would bring in new groups afterwards.
Yeah. Yep.
So they had been wrestling with Stranger's Wrath, and they had really great technology demo, but not really a design.
Yeah.
And what I found was it wasn't that they didn't have good ideas; it was that there was hesitance. I don't want to call it intellectual dishonesty because that's not fair, because they weren't trying to do this, but there was a big notion from Lorne and Sherry that we don't make shooters. We're not a shooter company. And I kept looking at them like, this is a shooter. I don't know what to tell you.
Mm-hmm.
And they were very against making a shooter. And so lots of conversations with Lauren and talking about other ways we could handle it. And we sort of settled on this notion of live ammo, using creatures and things like that, and to soften it, but make it very weird, odd-worldy. And that went over a lot better. But I think that's where they got hung up, was they had this great bit of technology that Charles Bloom had created in his team, beautiful art that Ryan had created in his group, but they couldn't get past this notion that they didn't want to make a shooter, but they were making a shooter.
Yeah, I remember when I got there and I looked at the design doc that I was handed, which was already so many months out of date. There was something in there about like the weapons had to have an arc to them. Like there was the slingshot had an arc to it, and it was, as I was reading it, like this doesn't make any sense. Like this is it reminded me of that. Remember that gorilla game or whatever it was called that was on like the it was in DOS, I believe it was. It was just two gorillas on one side. And you launched bananas at each other. You'd set a trajectory and a velocity. And you'd throw a banana, and it would like arc in the air and try to hit the other gorilla. Like it was like this super simple thing. And that was the only thing I could think of every time I read this design. I'm like, this was never gonna work. Like it needs to be a shooter, right? And it was clear they were trying to make it not be violent or that kind of game. And ultimately where we got to, I think, was fantastic.
Yeah, and it was interesting because they had the same notion of like, well, we don't like to do violence, but we do violence. Like we will stuff Madokans into a meat grinder and feed them to other Madokans. That was okay. So it was finding the right kind of violence that would speak to the Oddworld sensibilities, and that's where the live ammo came from, and that seemed to help.
Yeah. So what was your kind of first major objective as you were there, and kind of what was the state of the project overall? Because when I came on, it was I came in early 05 or late 04. I can't remember for sure now. And it was at a point where, I was replacing someone who'd left. And when I first got there, I was like, oh, I wonder, am I even going to work on this game? It seems like it's pretty far along. Am I just going to help finish this up and then go on? But it was like, oh no, you're gonna do a whole new boss battle. You're gonna run these two towns. Like there was still plenty of stuff for me to do. But like it also felt like the game had changed a lot right before I had gotten there.
Yeah, I think the first goal was just to understand Lorne. So Lorne came from movies and television, and so his mind is he's a brilliant storyteller. He's a brilliant character developer, but he thinks linearly, like TVs and movies.
Yeah.
So he had all these great ideas and gags to create, but they were very difficult to translate into games. So that was the first goal, was to go, okay, here's this creative director, and he's a mad scientist, and he's got all these ideas. How do I take that and make it a reusable game? Because I'm not going to go and ask the engineers to spend 4 months on a feature that's going to be used once for one gag.
Mm-hmm.
That's nuts, and it's going to drive them crazy, and there's going to be anger and blood and terrible things will happen. So understanding Lorne and getting to the root of what he was looking for was sort of the first goal. And then trying to figure out how to pare the game back. Were you there when there were still the Ninja Toads and all that?
I don't think so.
So later in the game, once you had the boat and you were traveling up and down the river,
Yeah.
you could recruit and find these little toads, and they were super cool. I wish we could have kept it.
Oh no,
But
I don't remember
really,
this.
they were like they were like samurai, like they had tons of honor. And they never really spoke, but they would follow you just religiously,
Hmm.
and they would do things for you, and you could give rough commands and things like that. They were very cool, but it was just this huge feature. And I was like, there's no time for this. So we were looking for places to pare back and taking some of Lorne's ideas that could be turned into reusable ideas, reusable features like dropping crates on stuff. So it's like, okay, we've made this activation creature that you can shoot. So now we're going to have lots of machinery that you can hit these things and it does a thing. So that became a reusable thing that it felt better to ask the engineers for, because I'm like, okay, here's a basic set of functionality. You shoot with this particular bullet and hit these kinds of things and it does something for you. I can reuse that in lots of places.
Yeah.
So that was a big deal. It was trying to find those nuggets that could be reused a lot. And it was fun, but it was a lot of work because everybody they get attached to stuff, right? The artist had spent forever on the toads, and to tell them, man, I don't have time, I don't have a place to put them. That was rough. But that's the same thing with Lorne or anybody that's visionary. You have to figure out what speaks to them.
Yeah.
And a lot of it for Lorne was like, okay, you have this good idea. I don't want to spend 6 months of engineering time doing it. So what's the core? What are you really looking for? And can I make something out of it that's reusable?
So wait, you're saying he had the idea and you had to figure out what's the core of his idea. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, for a lot of stuff. I mean, Lorne was still very high level, so there was all the nitty gritty. Like, not to disparage Lorne, but I considered him an artist more than anything. Like I said, he was brilliant at storytelling and character development and world creation. But the mechanics of game design and systemic design, it wasn't his thing. It either didn't interest him or it was deeper than he wanted to go.
Yeah.
But that was what I had to do, was to take these amazing high level things and then figure out what that really meant, what that really looked like in game.
Yeah. That is such an important skill in a lot of ways, right? Because as designers, everyone fancies themselves a designer, as you know, right? And it is true that most people are able to kind of have that initial like, oh, this is cool, right? Like, and it all starts with something sounds cool, right? But what we have to do is immediately, as soon as we hear an idea, we think through, what is that going to mean 2 years from now? And how is that going to mesh with everything else that we're doing? And that's what being a designer really is, right? Is taking ideas that are cool and making them feasible and functional and fun within the scope of the thing that we're building. Like that's ultimately it. Or if it's a good enough idea, you can consider changing the other things, but that's rare, right? Like usually it's convincing someone that's a great idea in a silo. Here's what we could do with that to kind of make it fit with what we're trying to do.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The designer's job is not to have all the ideas or to hand down edicts from an ivory tower. Your job is to cultivate all the best ideas from all the other brilliant people around you that work as a whole, right?
Yeah.
Like the games that are brilliant, that are greater than the sum of their parts, some designer, it wasn't one designer that had all of that, right? At least not anymore. I mean, maybe back in the day.
Usually not. Yeah.
People. But nowadays, it's like, my job is to set guardrails. Like, this is the kind of game we're making, and this is our North Star. This is where we're going. But tell me what you think would be cool. Like, what should the player get to do? And especially, it gets tough because you have to engage personalities that may not always want to be social, like engineers. Like, you have to engage engineers.
Yeah.
Because they have brilliant ideas, and often they can say, can't do it that way, but we could do this. And it's super important to have that feedback and that loop,
Yeah.
because then that's when the game becomes greater than its some of its parts.
You just reminded me, and I'm curious about your perspective on this. We worked with Charles Bloom as the lead
Mhm.
engineer, who I believe, well, I'm certain is the most brilliant game engineer I've ever worked with. Like that is true for me. Like this guy was he thinks about things that I don't even know how to think about. What was it like working with him from your perspective, as you as leads together and trying to kind of come together in something that to make this game into, you know, more of something that was feasible and doable and still innovative?
It was tough because, like you said, he was brilliant. I think he's an alien. I'm not convinced he was even human, because not only would he think of these things, but he could do it fast.
Really fast.
Um, and he had the team running smoothly, but it was tough working with him because his personality type and mine didn't mesh at all. And I think he considered design expendable. And I don't know if that was necessarily his view or if that's how he felt Oddworld treated designers.
Mm.
It's just sort of expendable fodder for Lorne to chew through and move on.
Well, that was a theme for a while, right? So
Yeah. So he may have just been like, I don't have time to waste on this person that's going to, be fired in 2 years. Um, so it was difficult, but the end goal was we had to make a great game. And my job was to sort of convey Lorne's wants into something that was usable and reusable that meshed all together. And so, it worked, but it wasn't fun and it wasn't easy.
yeah, it was definitely like when you're working with someone that we had a lot of, I always tell people that was the most talented team I've ever been on. Like every single person on that team was incredibly talented. And for me, early in my career, I was like, I knew that I was at the bottom and I was just like, what can I learn from all these people? Well, like it was an incredible learning experience for me and a little overwhelming at times, but at the same time pushed me to be a much better designer. And I learned so much in a short amount of time. But that was a lot of really good, really talented people, but a lot of also very dominant personalities, right? There was a lot of them on that team. So a lot of things weren't easy unless you got them on board, right? And that was the thing that as a designer we talk about, we have to always be able to do is get people to understand, here's what we're trying to do, here's why we want to do it. Let's do that, but I need your help. Like that kind of conversation. I had those a lot. Was that kind of the thing that you had as well, or was it much more of like a how was that dynamic just in general while we were finishing that up?
Well, at Oddworld, it was, if you could incorporate everybody's sort of wants and hear them out, then they tended to appreciate it, even if we didn't end up going down a particular route. Because as you know, like design is equal parts cheerleading and therapist and all kinds of different job titles all meshed into one. So you learn the personalities, you learn the triggers, and you figure out how best to communicate to them things that make them excited to get them on board. And again, it's asking the question, what is the core? Because most people, when they're thinking about an idea and they're excited about it, they're way up here when they're thinking about it, like the end result. Like I said, the grenade going off and the body flying. They're seeing this whole scene play out in their heads. So our job is then to pare that down. What is the core that they're actually excited about, that they want out of this? And it's the same like when you're talking to people that aren't in the game industry, right? Like, I saw this thing and I'm super excited about it, and understanding what they're really asking for.
Yeah.
Is tough, but that's the big thing, because if you hear the grenade went off and the body went flying and the glass shattered, you're like, crap, there's a year's work right there. Then you're going to say no and you're going to get defensive. But if you can pare it down to the simple bits, and you're like, okay, that's doable. What they really want is ragdoll. right? With explosions.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe we can do that. We can license the ragdoll technology. There's a start, and you start breaking it down. It makes it better. And even if you don't do it, you listened and they feel heard, and that goes a long way too.
And I love that you said that, because a lot of what we do is break things down to its simplest components, but also, like you've mentioned with Lorne and others, is understanding, here's this big thing they're talking about. What is the actual, the meat of it? What's the experience they're looking for? And then how can we make that cheaply and do it in a way that kind of fits in what we're trying to do? That's a really difficult thing for us as designers to do, but we have to be doing constantly.
Yeah. Because every time they're going to shoot the messenger, right? So if I go to Charles Bloom or something and say, hey, we need to do this thing. And, his mind is so quick. He's instantly figured out how long it's going to take, how many of his engineers, all these things. And he's going to be like, no. But if you come to him and go, hey, how do you feel about Ragdoll? Like, well, I've done it before. I could probably figure it out again. It's like, okay, Lorne would like to see Ragdoll for this. That wasn't really an issue for Stranger's Wrath, but as an example, breaking it down and bringing them a simple concept, goes a lot further than like, hey, we need circumstances, and then Ryan is over in the art pit overhearing this, going, crap, now we have to put in 2-story buildings into every level. Everybody's freaking out.
Oh man,